In the interim, let me first of all, I'll put us on pause if I finish up the preliminaries before we get Crystal connected. But ladies and gentlemen, let me just explain what the order will be here today and how we will do this. And perhaps we can move along as expeditiously as consensus allows, but certainly always, and the members know this, that we will certainly permit whatever discussion on whatever issues the members would like. And first things first, what we will do, or attempt to do, is close out and come to agreement on a couple of the open items that still remain, which are on our agenda. The first thing that I think we can agree on, which is not going to take much, and I don't think has controversy, is the motion that relates to the appointment of a FOIL officer, and I will take that up first. Then we'll go through some of these other items, followed by the more controversial issue as to party qualification, changes to independent nominating petitions. Before we vote on the entire package, because again, remember, we will then vote on the entire package, all votes and all roll calls we will be doing in alphabetical order, and that is, you know, to make sure that there's just a fair process. Before that, I'm going to ask Commissioner Berger to take us through the bill to ensure we've all looked at the pages of the bill and point out any particular issues. Just
it's not a bill, it's a
recommendation for a bill, I'm sorry. I stand corrected. And then we will also take a motion, I think, from Commissioner Galvin at some point about the report and any, you know, technical aspects of the report. That will be covered so that the report is going to be finished. And what I will also ask each of the members is this. Part of our charge is for each of us to submit our own statement. And I ask that sometime between now and tomorrow afternoon, hopefully before the close of business tomorrow, that each member could come up with their statement as it relates to this commission and your votes on the commission, or any issues that you feel are particularly important to be included in the final report. And if you could forward that, if you forward it to me, I will make sure that all the members get it. It would be good if you forward it to every member if you choose, and also to Charles Pensabene, who's been charged with putting together the final report. The final report will be issued as soon as practical when we have everything done, but no later than on Sunday, December the 1st, which is what was required under the statute. And that will be transmitted electronically as well as by mail on that day. So that is the process that we're going to run through today. And unless there are any questions with it, are we on the air?
Yes. You're on the air.
We're on the air.
But at the end, in fairness,
Yeah, I'm switching to the government Wi-Fi instead of my own. Just give me a
Okay.
second.
are we going to lose her?
I don't think so.
The Wi-Fi here is really bad.
Okay. As we have been waiting for Crystal, we're all set now? Just about?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so let's begin. Okay, first things first, I'd like to make a motion. I think it's a resolution of the Public Campaign Finance and Election Commission proposing the designation of a Records Access Officer and Records Appeals Officer in relation to the Freedom of Information Law pursuant to the authority granted to the Public Campaign Financing and Election Commission, the Commission, under Part XXX, Part 30 of Chapter 59 of the laws of 2019. The Commission designates the Records Access Officer and Records Appeals Officer at the Department of State to act on behalf of the Commission for all requests related to the Freedom of Information Law. All such requests shall be processed in conformity with the rules and regulations of the Department of State applicable here, thereto. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, any discussion? All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the motion passes. Thank you. Next, I'd like to make a motion, if I could, on the contribution level for statewide office. I know there has been, that was the only item left out. State Senate contribution limit is $10,000, $5,000 primary, $5,000 general. State Assembly is $5,000, $2,500 primary, $2,500 general. I'd like to make a motion that the statewide office contribution level be set at $18,000. Is there a second?
Can I amend that motion for the assembly to be 6,000, which we had agreed to 3,000 primary and 3,000 general?
Just, again, could you say it in the, can we do this, Commissioner Vargas? Would it be acceptable to you for us to vote on this amendment, and then you can make the next amendment? Is that all right? Or how do you want to do this? You're making an amendment to the amendment?
Yes.
Okay. So there's an amendment, well, can I get a second on the,
Hold on, we lost her now. We lost Crystal.
let's do this. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, with respect to the proposed amendment to the amendment, we've been handling these issues on a per-office basis. If there's a change or a proposed change to the assembly contribution limits, I would just be in favor of dealing with that as a standalone issue, not
Right, well, that's what we will
combined.
do.
Yeah.
What
Well,
we'll do
you're
is
amending, you just,
what we're going to do is this. We're going to vote on the amendment to the amendment, meaning the last piece. Then we will vote on the first, so we're going to vote first on the assembly increase, and then we will go to the original amendment, if I can get a second for it. Is there a second for the original amendment? There's a second.
When you say
Commissioner
the
Berger.
original amendment,
The
you mean
amendment
that
is for
statewide-
18,000,
the
statewide to be
contribution,
18,000.
Which we had not agreed upon.
That's
There was
right.
no agreement, so it's
Right.
really not an amendment, it's
It's
just
a
a
motion.
motion.
Okay,
Right.
you're right. All right, I stand corrected again. So okay, is that fair, Commissioner Vargas?
Yes.
Okay, so then you're making a motion to amend the motion I have offered to adjust the assembly to 6,000 from 5,000.
Yes.
3,000 primary, 3,000 general.
Yes,
Uh,
which
do-
was in the original report.
Okay,
Yes.
But which we voted 6-3 to go to 5,000 at the last meeting.
right, but was there a second to that? Are we getting a second on that?
The internet
No,
on
he's talking about the substance.
Yeah, okay. I wouldn't like to vote on that without Crystal Rodriguez on there, because I think that's important.
Is there?
Any luck?
Yeah, I've got internet. It's not showing up on her end for some reason.
Okay. With permission, can I vote then on the first item, and can we defer this one until we
Well,
get?
we still need Crystal's vote,
Yeah, okay,
if that's okay.
sure.
The wife.
Yes, I'm on your network, this one, right? And it's not showing up on her end. Somebody's touching it.
It's probably this, no, this is a spam. My apologies, folks, we're just having a little technology matter here.
Keeps saying she's not available. Maybe it'll pop up.
Can we go onto an iPhone, perhaps? Is that possible?
I had forgotten this room is really bad for,
That's why we brought that.
internet.
Why?
But even with that, it's still knocked her out.
Even the data plans, it's something in the ceiling box that mentions.
She says she can't see us calling. Do you have like a Zoom and some other line we could use? Google Hangout. I could do a hangout on there.
Yeah.
Any luck?
There's something here that's knocking out the signal.
I mean, at some point,
I know.
yeah, you know.
It is ridiculous.
And then on both of our ends, it went, she froze and then I froze. Well, now I can't let her.
Well, I remember last meeting, everyone waiting for someone to stretch.
There's a person on your right.
Yep, yep, yep.
And you did come out, you did come down.
Yes, we have to be able to see her.
Yeah,
Yes,
from
we have to
FaceTime
see her.
calls. Okay.
You know, for the time being, yeah, but it's, we had this working before and,
I think it's your Wi-Fi.
Their
The
pack
signal.
is not working.
Yeah.
You good? Let's see.
Would it work from there, Jeff? Oh, there we go. Can you see us? Yes.
I'm going back, I'm back on my Wi-Fi.
Now give us a second.
See if this works. Set up on her end. Yeah, I went back on my Wi-Fi.
Sounds like they have one on the phone.
Yeah.
Yeah, send it to him, give him.
All right, I'm closing.
Any luck here?
We're on the Sprint one. Which one? The Sprint one. Sprint? No, that's yours.
It's just going on FaceTime.
Here, let's see if this just works.
Neil Armstrong came in easier.
So she's there.
Jay.
It's torture. Crystal? The volume up as loud as it can go. I can see and hear you. We can't see you.
So maybe she's got
Or
something
hear
on
you.
her end. that she's
Turn
got.
on
Jay.
video.
Yeah.
What happened with your suggestion that they just FaceTime?
Yeah, no possibility just to
I
FaceTime?
tried FaceTime. It's not working on her end to connect with us. Like, she's not even seeing the call come through.
I see,
I tried.
yeah.
She can see us, she just,
Well,
that you can,
To call her on FaceTime.
yeah.
let's do this. I think we're gonna have to,
Hey,
yep.
is there another phone number you can call her on?
Oh.
Is her friend right there? Maybe if it's her own phone
She's in her
setting.
office.
It's her own phone setting, that could fix it.
If I can just,
Okay. Well, now FaceTime is working.
oh, there we
All
got it?
right, good, it's working.
Okay. Oh,
FaceTime's working?
Yes,
Can you hear?
yes.
yep, okay, there we got you now. All right, good to see you. All right, so what we have now is a motion to amend my motion, and I think we should take it up first. Is there a second? The motion is to increase the contribution level for the assembly seats to $6,000, $3,000 for the primary, $3,000 for the general. Is there a second? Commissioner Rodriguez, would you second?
Can you hear us?
There's a lot of movement in background, but
Okay,
I can hear.
okay.
There's a motion on the table. Did you hear the motion?
The motion is this is for,
The state assembly to increase from $5,000 to $6,000. The motion was made by Commissioner Vargas, so I was wondering if there was a second and if you chose to second it? Okay, now we have a motion and a second. Is there discussion on this?
Yeah, I would just say, without respect to the merits of increasing the assembly,
Excuse me,
Please remove this person.
excuse me.
Please remove him right now.
Yep.
We can't have this interruption.
All right,
so,
yep, yep. Could you,
without getting to the merits of whether or not we should increase the assembly threshold, I just ask that everyone be mindful in doing so, if the commission were to act favorably on that motion, that it really throws out the proportionality with respect to the Senate district, which is currently, per the last meeting, at 10,000. So that you would almost have with the Senate district being 2.4 times the size of an assembly district, if you were to increase the assembly amount to 6,000, the assembly then would have a contribution limit that would be, close to 2/3 of the Senate contribution limit, which is a district that's almost 2.5 times the size of it. So it doesn't really make sense. So I would just ask that if there was a favorable action on that increase, that it be proportional to an increase in the Senate contribution limit.
Commissioner Nona?
Yeah, I'm concerned that our contribution limits are already kind of on the high side and shouldn't be so high. I know we discussed this last time, and we came down to 5,000 as the appropriate amount, and I haven't heard a rationale as to why we should increase it. Is there a rationale? Is there a reason other than just increasing it?
Well, no, yes, there is a reason. According to our original proposal, it was said that the assembly will be 6,000 and it should be on.
Yeah, I think it's on.
Okay, the
Yeah.
assembly should be, we had it at 6,000 and the Senate at 10, and then we'll, according to your amendment now, it will be, the statewide office will be decreased from 25 to 18.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
Commissioner
we debated the 6,000 versus the 5,000 last time and just settled on 5,000. So frankly, from my point of view, I don't see a reason to revisit it.
Yeah, I don't know if there's confusion, but in the last meeting, my recollection was we set the Senate at 10, the Assembly at 5. Earlier iterations were 12 and 6, but I don't believe there's ever an iteration that was 10 and 6.
Commissioner Katachi?
Yeah, Yeah, just reiterating, I think what Commissioner Nona said around and what Commissioner Previtt said around proportionality, but also really, we worked hard to bring the contribution limits substantially down, noting that we are still, especially if we were going to a 3,000 and 3,000, would be double what is at the city council level, and the city council districts are larger than assembly districts, so rationale is not making sense to me in this moment for why we'd increase it already above what is a more reasonable lower threshold.
Okay, can I call the question? I'm going to do it I'll do it by roll call, if that's okay?
Okay.
Is that fine? Commissioner Berger?
No.
Commissioner Dennisstein is not here. Commissioner Galvin?
No.
Commissioner Katachu?
No.
Commissioner Jacobs is a no. Commissioner Nona?
No.
Commissioner Previtt?
No.
Commissioner Rodriguez?
Yes.
Commissioner Vargas?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, the motion to amend fails, and that's 2 votes in favor and 6 votes opposed, 1 absent. Okay. Now, on the motion, the original motion to make the statewide limit $18,000, we've had a second. Is there any discussion?
Yes, I'm very troubled by this. I think it should be lower. However, we're trying to reach a consensus here, and my understanding is we can reach a consensus on a lot of other items of a public finance program, and the legislature could not pass this bill. We are charged with coming up with a recommendation, and our process is kind of a legislative process, and there have to be some concessions in order to put together a program that for the large part makes sense in terms of the thresholds we've talked about for qualifying, a number and amount, the other restrictions we have. Also important to me is that we put in a provision that there'd be no matches for contributions above $250, even for the first $250 of a larger contribution. I'm willing to compromise on this so we can move forward on everything else. As reluctantly as I am, I'm willing to compromise on this.
Any other discussion? Okay, can I ask I'll do a voice vote. If it's clear, all in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the motion passes on voice vote. Okay, next, I'd like to move, and I appreciate your indulgence. I'd like to move on changing the match fund cap, the total number of dollars to be spent in matchable funds for all statewide races. That's Attorney General, Comptroller, and Lieutenant Governor, of course, would be half, only primary, and Governor, to $7 million total, $3.5 million primary, $3.5 million general election, and of course, Lieutenant Governor would just be $3.5 primary. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. For discussion?
Just to back up for a second, so previously we reached a consensus, I believe, that the match cap for Senate would be $750, $375, and $375.
No, yeah, that's right, yes.
And we're not changing
Not
that.
changing any of
Assembly
those.
is $375.
That's, yeah, right.
Okay, so we're not changing the match caps.
No.
So we had originally
This is
talked
just on
about
statewide.
a cap of 18 million, and then there was some discussion of 10 million, so now we're moving it to 7 million. So
Yeah.
that saves some taxpayer money,
That does,
absolutely.
yep. Okay, any other discussion? All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Can I then take us to Commissioner Cartaccio? You have been very,
Excuse me, just to clarify, did you say all statewide?
all statewide.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Commissioner Cartaccio, I'd like you to present a motion on something that you've been very, very vigorously arguing in favor of, and I think it's a good idea, so go ahead, Commissioner.
I want that on the record, vigorously debating, arguing in favor of, and it's a good idea. So I'll take my small victories where I can get them. Thank you, Commissioner Jacobs. So I would like to move forward a motion that we provide the match for aggregate contributions from any one contributor for no greater than $250. So we're not going to match contributions for larger contributions over $250. So anybody who makes a contribution at that level, 250 or below will be matched, and so specifically, I would limit public campaign financing match-in funds for every candidate to only contributions to candidates who donate an aggregate of $250 or less during any one election cycle, and require the candidate to return all matching funds from any contributor who, through the entire election cycle, exceeds that $250 in aggregate contributions.
I'll second that motion.
Okay. Is there any discussion on that?
So if anything is above the 250, it will go towards the threshold, but it will be matched.
Okay.
You gotta speak here.
You gotta speak
Yeah.
in.
Yeah.
I'm saying if any amount above 250, it will go towards the threshold, but it will not be matched.
No, nothing above the 250, I think, goes to the threshold.
This is what I understand the motion to be. If someone donates or contributes $1,000 or $2,000, there's no match for the first 250
That's
of that
correct.
2,000 or
That's
1,000.
So,
But to be clear, the first 250 will count towards meeting
right.
the threshold
exactly,
amount.
so that does answer her question.
That's right,
Yes.
that's right.
Yes.
Good. Okay. Yes, Commissioner?
Are we at discussion?
Yeah.
No, my only issue is, I don't know of any data that's been provided with respect to the differential on these two issues with this one coming up. I know it's been discussed in passing when we've talked about matchable rates. However, there's been a lot of discussion focused on whether or not there's sufficient money within a district to pull down the matching funds to be competitive. And if we're taking out a pool of contributors, so in my mind, anyone that contributes $251 or more, if that makes up 25% of a candidate's fundraising effort, whether or not not having the match on all of those contributions affects the vitality of the program. I have no idea. I mean, I don't think we've looked at anything to determine. I certainly agree in concept that we shouldn't be matching large contributions. I just worry about, we're not on the New York City model. We've made a number of changes that departed from experts that have provided recommendations from the gold standard program that we have in the city. I just don't know what the impact of that would be, and I just want to put that on the record. But obviously, I'm supportive in concept.
Thank you. Duly noted, Commissioner. Any other comments? Okay, I'll try again with a voice vote. All those in favor of Commissioner Catacho's motion, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion passes. Okay. Now I would like to ask Commissioner Berger and Commissioner Galvin to take us through the details of the program administration, if you could, and then you can, I think the vote, because we have approved that, so I don't think you need to be too significant on that. You might want to take that portion of the recommended bill at this point and review that portion, if that works. Okay, and then you're gonna make a motion.
Why are you not following that?
I am.
The next one is 15 to 1 and
I'm sorry.
skipped one.
You skipped
I'm
one.
skipping, I apologize. So before I get to that, you are right. Commissioner Nona, I apologize. Commissioner Nona, you have an amendment that you'd like to make.
Yeah, my amendment was to the matching, the progressive matching contributions, that instead of matching the first $50 12 to 1, we match 15 to 1. And the rationale behind that is we are not allowing any out-of-district matches. So this, again, helps candidates in getting matching funds within their district.
Is there a second?
I second that motion.
Okay. Let's have discussion. Anybody? Go ahead.
I'll just reiterate, prior comments with respect to the progressive match. I understand the purpose to ensure that there's sufficient funds within the district if you're limited to in-district contributions. Frankly, I'm much less concerned about that, given the parity in contribution limits between participating and non-participating candidates. There's no reason for a candidate not to participate in this program anymore. With respect to the progressive match, I'm troubled already with that being the basis, as previously stated. If there's any sense that there's corruptibility of a contribution of $250 or less, we shouldn't be matching it at all. And the fact that we're now favoring small dollar contributions over other small contributions makes no sense to me. I would prefer just a increased flat match for all small contributions, or not calling a contribution that's potentially corruptible a matching small contribution. So the progressive doesn't make sense, and a 15-to-1 would make that even worse, in my opinion.
Thank you, Commissioner. Other comments? I will comment on it myself, if I might. While I can sympathize with it in the concept, and of course, you know, I was the proponent originally when the gentleman who described himself as an Uber driver came in here at one of the hearings of the progressive match, which then turned out to be something familiar and done in Montgomery County, Maryland as well, which we did not know at that time. So I'm a big fan of the progressive match. My concern is that when we start reaching high numbers of the match, we threaten the public support because the numbers begin to really get out of touch. But, so I think 15-to-1 is a bit much. I think 12-to-1, which provides for an overall $250 match. When you do 12-to-1 on the first 50, 9-to-1 on the next 100, 8-to-1 on the last 100, that comes out mathematically to 9.2-to-1, which is already 50%, more than 50% greater than the 6-to-1 that's been called for, and it's 25%, well, not 25, 12.5% greater than the city's match. So we're already significantly higher. Now, I just want to point out some numbers, if I could.
Like, we should be able to contribute across the state. State policies impact all the New Yorkers. So to limit in-district contributions to just that, like, our democracy is open, right? And so
This is not a hearing, this is just an open meeting, sir. I appreciate your response. We've discussed this, and I appreciate it.
Jay, you have been continuously trying to, like, block and limit our democracy. You have continuously tried to attempt to go after the Workers' Family Party, attempt to, like, destroy future voting. I'm not grabbing my hands, you grab my hands. Like you attempt to continue to destroy the Workers' Family Party, and at the same time, state policies impact all the New Yorkers. So it is not an issue if we could vote, if we could contribute to, like, you know, it's like us in New York. Us in New York, we want to make sure that we have a democracy that works for all New Yorkers. And we need to be able to contribute.
If I think that you're a good candidate for my district, why shouldn't I get just as much support and put my contribution to you as anybody in your district? That's right. Every decision that's made is made for the whole state. I become one of your constituents when you become a public office holder, regardless of if I'm in your district or not. I am one of your constituents. I should be able to put just as much money into your campaign as anybody else, regardless of what district I come from. We should be supported equally.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's continue. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Everybody got a fair chance. Fair chance for everyone. Every district.
It's a, no, it's
Okay,
a
ladies
good
and gentlemen,
argument, but it's
let
misplaced.
me continue, if I might. Thank you.
Remember us when you want to vote.
The point I was trying to make is the following. With the current 9.2 match, 9.2-to-1 match, where we are right now, just so you understand, is that in a $175,000 assembly primary, as an example, with a 9.2 match, a candidate would need to raise $19,022, and they would then get the entire $175,000, which is the maximum match. At $250, that means you'd need 76 donors. Now, there are lots of districts that don't have 76 people who can give $250. But I will tell you that there are lots of iterations where that maximum amount, because again, we're talking about a maximum amount. It's not an unlimited amount. And we're only talking about the 175 and 175, primary in general. So if you had in a district, for instance, as an example, that had 15 donors who just gave $250, 75 donors who gave 100, 60 donors who gave $50, 100 donors gave 25, 60 donors gave 10. you would make, 310 donors would make $175,000. There are many, many iterations of this. At the 12-to-1 match, just so you know, if you raised $50 increments from every one of your individuals, you'd need to raise $14,583 in order to get the $175,000. This is not. So I am just saying to you that. What,
This is ruining our democracy.
Absolutely.
okay. What I'm saying to you is that there are many different ways to get to this. So I'd like to call the motion. Is there any other discussion on this issue?
Well, we can wait for Mylan
Yeah,
to vote.
Yeah, that's where I saw her coming. That's why.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning. Nick of time. So there we are. Okay. So can I ask? Is there any other further discussion on?
Let me just add, this was a hotly debated issue among the commission, and, you know, we came out to a conclusion. I'm not happy with it, but we want to come up with a program that we think will work, and that requires some, reaching some compromises. Someone could still contribute to an out-of-district candidate whom they want to contribute to. There's just no match, and there's arguments in favor of limiting the match to the district and arguments against that. So this is an effort to come up
Mic's off.
with a compromise result, and that's why I proposed the 15. Thanks.
I appreciate it.
15-to-1 match to kind of compensate for that.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other comments? Do we want
Well,
to do-
yeah, no,
okay,
I think
sorry.
the 12-to-1 actually meets halfway. I think the 12-to-1 actually meets, it's a reasonable halfway number for all of us to agree to. And then for the first 50, then it'll be 9-to-1 for the next 100, and 8-to-1 to the next 100. And now, based on our last motion, it will cop out at 250. So I think 15-to-1 might be too high
Yeah.
for us to start with this program.
I'm going to do a roll call on this. Commissioner Nona, is that appropriate, do you think?
Yes.
Roll call you prefer? Okay. Commissioner Berger?
No.
Commissioner Dennerstein?
Can I go last?
Yes, I'll allow that because you just came in. Commissioner Galvin?
No.
Commissioner Gatacho?
No.
Commissioner Jacobs votes no. Commissioner Nona?
Yes.
Commissioner Previtt?
No.
Commissioner Rodriguez?
No.
Commissioner Vargas?
No.
Commissioner Dennerstein?
No.
No, okay. The motion fails 8-1, but I thank you, and I understand the sense behind it. Now I'd like to move to a report by Commissioners Berger and Galvin on the details of the program as it relates in the recommended bill, and then we'll go to the last piece on that issue.
I'll try to keep it as short as I can, but there are several pieces to it. And Commissioner Galvin, if I say something wrong or there's an addition, please jump in.
Can you tell us page numbers that you're on?
Okay, we're going to work from page 12. What is being proposed and what we've discussed in the past, and it's really based on the testimony we received, is that we are going to create a public campaign finance board. The public campaign finance board will be made up of 7 people, including the 4 current Board of Election Commissioners, or the 4 existing Board of Election Commissioners, and 3 additional commissioners, one appointed by the leaders of the party, the legislative leaders of the party that got the most votes in the last statewide general election, and one by the minority leaders who got the second most votes, and one by the governor. So there'll be a total of 7 commissioners. The commissioners will actually get paid $350 a day to a maximum of $25,000 a year, and they will be considered public officers. The entire work will be divided really into 2 parts. What I call the mechanical stuff, the day-to-day work, will be done by the compliance unit of the Board of Elections, and I believe the testimony we got was that they are, one, in the best position to do it and capable of doing it. And that will be, logging in the contributions, making determinations as to eligibility of those contributions for matches, audits, reviewing the audits, making recommendations on violations, and all that information will then go to the Public Campaign Finance Board, which will have the obligation, 1, to adopt rules and regulations, 2, to make final decisions on violations and imposition of penalties, 3, render advisory opinions, 4, impose penalties, 5, arrange for the enforcement of the collection of those penalties, and 6, make referrals on any criminal matters to the Attorney General for enforcement on criminal matters. The additional staff to be hired for the compliance unit, if it is necessary, will be made by the Public Campaign Finance Board, and the
Just for clarification on that point, Commissioner Berger, because the 3 new commissioners are not appointed until January of 2022, I believe that we discussed that an initial influx of staff may be hired by the State Board of Elections to get the program up and running. And once the campaign finance, such as software, software upgrades, continual reviewers, IT people, things of that nature. And once and there may also be a need for the initial draft of basic general regulations that are obviously put out for comment for everybody, not the specifics of how the program is actually executed. That would be in line with the new commissioners. But
actually, the very last line of Section 1, members of... The last line of Section 1 is, all members of the PCFB shall be appointed no later than the first day of July 2020, and they shall issue regulations no later than the first day of July 2021. There's an internal change that has to be made.
Yeah, there's a middle line in that paragraph.
There's an internal change, yeah, that, that's a mechanical change that didn't get picked up, but it's...
But in sum, that is the basic, I mean, generally, that is the basic program as you're describing it.
For the members of the audience, just so you know, these are all elements that were approved in detail at the last meeting, and it's just the language we're trying to nail down so that the bill conforms with what it was that we agreed upon, and that's why we're going through this process. We're going to go through it. This will be published. It's not published yet.
Okay.
So then, since it has both languages, wouldn't they're appointed on July 2020, right? Not 2022?
Right.
So the correct one is 2020?
Right.
Okay.
July 1, 2020.
Got it.
It was moved up so they can more fully participate
Right.
in
Which
both.
makes sense.
Yeah.
Right. And then a lot of the other mechanical stuff, such as creating a database, will be done in conjunction with the Board of Elections. But essentially, the division is the Board of Elections does the mechanical work, the Public Campaign Finance Board makes all policy decisions and makes all final decisions on matters. And that's what's set forth on pages.
But
So then-
internally, there is no division of the staff. They all work in concert with one another together.
So then the hiring will continue as it is now, then, right?
The hiring will continue as is now, but the board will now go from 4 to 7.
Yes,
Yeah.
okay.
And then,
Henry, before you move on past Section 1, I just had a quick clarifying question with
Yes.
respect to the appointments. The language appears to be restrictive, which I like in terms of being able to remove an appointed member. I think to provide that commissioner some independence in their actions. However, was it meant to not allow, if there's a change in the actual appointing authority, that new appointing authority doesn't have the ability to put their, to make an appointment?
that's correct.
That's
Once a
intentional.
person's appointed, they get to serve their term of 5 years, and whoever the new appointing authority is at the end of those 5 years gets to appoint the successor. You know, there are limitations. The members of the board cannot make contributions to any covered race. There are provisions for enforcement of penalties, and the PCFB will be in charge of making sure that that happens. If there's a notice of violation to a campaign, the campaign has the opportunity to appear before the PCFB, but it's the PCFB that makes the final decision on the imposition of penalties. If somebody goes to court, we provided here as in the election law that these matters have priority over other matters in the court because we're working on a very tight time frame, as with all election law matters, and the PCFB shall issue a report. The first report is on January 1st, 2025. The next one is on January 1st, 2027, and then every 4 years thereafter, with a report on their activities and recommendations for changes.
No, but why every 4 years after?
Because that's the major cycle, and it seems to work effectively. Once a report is issued, there are recommendations for changes. It takes the legislature time to catch up with it. I think the general feeling was every 2 years was just too frequently, and every 4 years covers not only the legislative cycle but the major state cycle. What are your thoughts on that?
I prefer every two. What New York City does
Every 4.
every 4.
But don't forget,
They're all on a 4.
But they're on a
So,
4-year cycle.
so a major part of this program is on a 2-year cycle, and there's gonna be, no report issued at the conclusion of those, cycles, and,
There will be a first report after
yeah,
the
no, I
first cycle,
understand.
which is the legislative cycle, and then we'll go into the regular 4-year cycle after.
Listen, I'm just always in favor of the legislature being informed of what's going on, and in the absence of a report detailing, they're not gonna have the necessary information
Well-
to know what's going on with these programs. It's an issue that.
They are, because the State Board of Elections is required to give an annual report to all of those agencies specifically, and this is a unit contained therein. So that part of the State Board of Elections annual report will come out every year. No one envisions that part changing with the basics and the numbers and the metrics of the program.
Okay. And the last piece of this is that the PCFB will come up with regulations for debates, and every candidate will,
Can I just-
who is participating will be required to participate in at least one debate.
Just to get clarity here on the 2-year, and then you mentioned, Commissioner Galvin, this 1 year, the annual reporting cycle, because the 2-year off cycle for the legislature happens to also be the presidential year in most years, so there's likely to be higher turnout. So it would be helpful to still have reporting, even if there aren't recommendations around how to improve the program, like a comprehensive report of what happened in the intervening 2-year cycle. Is there a way to include a recommendation along that lines? Again, we don't need to have a recommendation about how to improve the program overall, but a comprehensive analysis of what happened in that 2-year cycle would be, I think, helpful for public purposes.
Okay. I agree. Commissioner Berger, I think, I'm not sure if you mentioned this or not, but the Public Campaign Finance Board, the PCFB, if you will also have the ability to directly fine candidates and committees for violations. They won't,
They can impose penalties,
right,
yes.
yes.
And they have the authority for
Right.
seeking enforcement of those penalties.
The audits are also required to be completed within 18 months of the election. I know that people have questioned the State Board of Elections and the ability to effectively administer the program. I've argued, a little biased because I work there, but they are professional people. I would reiterate my point, my continuing point, that if the program is not funded appropriately and early enough, there will be difficulties that do not rest with the personnel at the board. We need an initial influx of funds for technology and for the initial ramp-up of staff and administrative spacing, hardware, computers, and that sort of thing. And if we don't get it, we can't do it. So I'm putting that out there again, that funding is a necessary requirement for anybody that's gonna administer this new program.
Now, Kim, can you elaborate on the annual report that the State Board of Elections does currently?
Every agency is required to annually report to the governor and the legislature as to their functioning and metrics throughout the year with regard to each of their units. So election operations, we had, 300 petitions. The council's office had 78 legal challenges that they had to defend, certain things like that. It's a substantial document that every agency has to produce.
Okay.
Based on the very cogent arguments of my colleague, I'd like to propose an amendment which would require that they shall submit a report to the legislature on or before the January 1st, 2025, and every second year thereafter. I don't think that's imposing. If there's a second.
Mr. Previtt's motion? That's what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I only make suggestions.
And it was a cogent suggestion. So I'm making it as a motion. Is there a second? All right. I don't think it's imposing too much of an obligation on the PCFB. And if things come up, they ought to be in a position to make recommendations. And I think you're right on that.
Can we have a voice vote on that? All those in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay.
That passes.
Okay.
That generally goes through how it's going to work.
Okay, before, let's just
Excuse
finish.
me, just one more second. If you could just, Mr. Berger, if you could just,
Or you can do it.
again, the criminal matters will be referred to the Attorney General.
Yes.
That's a
And,
clarification that is,
As
a
it
lot
is
of people
now.
look for. No, they are
No.
not, no. That is
As a practical matter, referring matters to local district attorneys, which the Board of Elections has the authority to do, has not resulted in action in most cases. And we think that, since this is really, although it's a criminal matter, it's coming out of a
Does
civil
this-
program.
Is this intended, in your opinion, to give the Attorney General original jurisdiction over the matters, or just to act upon referral? It's a big difference.
This is to act upon referrals.
Okay.
I don't think we can give them original jurisdiction without such a referral, the way the law is currently constructed.
I agree, thank you.
So, just to add to that, my understanding of why district attorneys don't take up those referrals often gets back to kind of Kim's point on funding, and that they're dealing with a caseload that, an election matter may not take priority over the other matters that they're dealing with. I don't know if the same result would occur with the AG receiving those referrals, but one change that could be advanced that would ensure that there's always at least someone that could bring an action, not necessarily on a criminal side, but at least on the civil side, would be a right of private action. Does that exist in this construct or no?
Yeah. Article 14 already has a provision
Right.
for private action on anything relating to reporting, et cetera. I don't know how, I could take a look, but.
Well, are you just envisioning that carries over for any matter within
Well-
respect of this too, or no, or?
Certainly within the limits of Article 14, which is failure to file a report, filing a false report, those kinds of matters, those are covered in Article 14.
Right.
And that, of course, we carry over here because we're not amending that.
Okay.
Thank you. Now, I'd like to ask Commissioner Berger, if you would make
Sure.
a...
I'm sorry, one other question. On the AG one, how are we dealing with, the AG is a covered entity under this program, and referrals are going to be going to the AG. What's the AG do on a referral for the AG?
Hopefully, they're a professional.
Okay, I just raising
No,
that
I-
point, that you don't,
I mean, look, on the federal level, we have the Justice Department enforcing all these things, and the Justice Department is an executive agency under the president. Sometimes there are problems, but for the most part, with most normal people holding the office, it hasn't been a problem up till now. and hopefully the New York voters will be aware of that.
Okay. Commissioner Berger, what I'd like to do is the one piece that's outstanding that we needed to finish up on this aspect was the makeup of the Campaign Finance Board. If we can make a motion to have that, codified that way, if you could.
So I move that we adopt the structures I have discussed, which would create a public campaign finance board of 7 members, including the 4 commissioners of the Board of Elections and 3 other members, 1 appointed by the legislative leaders of each of the major parties and 1 appointed by the governor.
I second the motion.
Is there any further discussion? All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. That passes. Now, I do want to call a move to reconsider on a prior item, because as I had promised, there was only one major controversial item, and I don't think it's appropriate. Commissioner Dennerstein was not in the room. A vote was taken on this issue of the assembly limit to 6,000, and since I voted originally on the opposing side, and I now would like to make a motion to reconsider that issue, to go to to have you go to the $6,000 for the assembly, 3,000 on the primary, 3,000 on the general. Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Okay. Is there any further discussion on the matter?
No, no.
Please.
We're reconsidering the vote on that issue? I don't
Yeah,
understand what
well,
we're doing.
we are reconsidering the vote. I had said originally that if there was any member that was not here, Commissioner Dennerstein was not here. That was a controversial motion.
Okay.
And I felt that we should review it and go over it, and people have the right to change their vote or keep their vote, whatever they would like. So I'm going to do the roll call again, if I could, on that. Commissioner Berger?
Yes.
Commissioner Dennerstein?
Yes.
Wait a minute,
Commissioner Galvin?
I'm confused.
Yes.
The motion is to increase,
Yes, the assembly from
that we just
25
voted no on,
that we now reconsidered, motion to
But
reconsider.
it was,
Yes.
and we have 2 yeses.
We have 2 yeses.
Okay. Is it up to me?
Yeah, no, you're Galvin.
It's up to you.
Yeah, I'm a no.
Okay. Gatacho?
Abstain.
Jacobs votes yes. Commissioner Nona? Commissioner Previtt?
I'm gonna vote no, as I did 2 minutes ago, but again, the Senate, I remind everyone that the disproportional contribution limits now for those 2 offices, so it's a no vote, and I'll be bringing in a motion to create parity after the conclusion of the vote.
Okay. Commissioner Rodriguez?
Still yes.
And Commissioner Vargas?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, the motion passes. Okay. Next, Commissioner Previtt, did you indicated you want to make a motion?
Yeah, as of the last meeting, the contribution limits were set for the Assembly at 5,000, the Senate at 10,000. That's including primary and general. As previously stated, Senate districts almost 2.5 times the size of an Assembly district. It wasn't necessarily proportional before at 5 and 10, but now 6 and 10 makes no sense. So I make a motion that the Senate district correspondingly goes up to 12, even though I'm not in favor of higher contribution limits. But just for equity and rationality throughout the
I
program.
appreciate that. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
The motion's been seconded. Is there any discussion, further discussion on that?
Just need a moment.
Hold on.
Yeah, what's the exact numbers? Is that what you're looking in there, Henry?
Yeah, we're looking at the exact numbers. The Commissioner Berger is looking up the current and the election law,
Mm-hmm.
If I can find it.
if you can find it.
It's in there.
I know it's in there. They made it too long.
Thank you for bringing in the book, Commissioner Berger.
Isn't it
It's
19,300
11,800
for the general?
in a general and 4,700 in the primary.
And that's for who?
I'm sorry.
No,
I'm sorry. I'm wrong,
7,500.
I'm wrong.
Yeah.
It's 11,800 in the general.
State Senate General.
And 7,500 primary, no?
I think it's 7,500 in the primary,
Yeah.
right?
That's 19.3.
Yes.
19.3.
The assembly is it's currently 4,700 each.
Just to make sure I'm following along, Commissioner Previtt's motion is to increase the Senate contribution to 12,000 in parity with the vote that we just took. For the
Proportionality, yes, with the proportionality. That is his motion. And anything to say on that?
My furrowed brow, thank goodness I don't play poker. I'm just being honest and being on the record that the contribution limits are really high. I appreciate Senator, now I've given you a new title, Commissioner Previtt's need for recommendation for parity. I'm also just very uncomfortable with us continuing to increase the contribution limits, effectively, bringing them back up closer to where they were. It doesn't help the system actually have integrity, and especially if we're going to have the same limits for participating and non-participating candidates.
Commissioner Nona? Okay. All right, let's call it. I'm going to do a vote on this motion. I'll go through it again by roll call. Commissioner Berger?
No.
Commissioner Dennisstein?
No.
Commissioner Galvin?
No.
Commissioner Cotaccio?
No.
Commissioner Jacobs votes no. Commissioner Nona?
No.
Commissioner Previtt?
Yes?
Okay. Commissioner Rodriguez?
No.
Commissioner Vargas?
No.
Okay. The motion fails, and so that it stays, the Senate stays at 10,000.
And we're noting, of course, though, that Commissioner Previtt's argument made perfect sense.
No, we're not noting that.
Well, I'm noting that it made perfect sense.
Commissioner Previtt often makes great sense.
I'll just remind everyone, the commission and our actions are being litigated, and, if we're just acting arbitrary, I think we're putting the entire program at jeopardy. And if you have no rationale for positions being taken in terms of setting one limit and then creating no proportionality between another limit, I don't know how we justify that.
Well, there are certain campaign expenses that are just fixed regardless of the size of the district. If we were doing purely proportional, I think the contribution limit for governor might be like $4.5 million or something like that. But that's not what we do. There are certain basic campaign expenses that are fixed, and then there are added expenses based on district size. And so, you don't need exact proportionality.
I'm not
to
looking
make
for
this
exact
work.
proportionality anywhere. We haven't looked at what campaigns cost. We haven't looked at any of the data that would drive a contribution limit for an assembly or senate district. We're just throwing out their numbers, and if the charge of the commission was to get the money out and create a stronger reliance on small dollar donors, I don't know how you justify it with an increase in the assembly and then not treating the Senate in the same manner. Just none of it makes sense to me. And I understand your argument could be true, but based on what? I mean, our guess of what fixed costs could be and how they correspond to different district sizes. I need something more of a basis to make those kind of arguments.
Especially taken in light of the fact that we all voted no, and 10 minutes later, without any explanation, we voted yes to increase one limit. The fixed costs apparently went up in the 10 minutes between the votes, so.
Yeah, we are, I appreciate that, but let me move to the next issue if I could. Party qualification threshold. I make a motion.
Before you move on, I know it's not on your agenda, but with respect to the matches, we still agreed statewide match 6-1, and then the progressive match.
Yeah, the statewide, I'll restate. You want to state it?
No, it was off, now it's on. Just want to make sure that, the previous votes that we took, we're not revisiting as to the matches, the 6-1 statewide match, the progressive match, the AMI, the qualification thresholds for the number of contributions, the amount of the contributions, the lower limit for the lower threshold for AMI. We're not revisiting any of those votes. Just want to make that clear.
Not yet.
Okay.
I would just,
Well,
a
that's
small.
why I'd like to make sure once and for all, we're not revisiting those.
I don't
votes.
have any stomach for that, so let me move to party qualifications. I'd like to move to amend section 1-1043 of the election law to change the definition of party as a body receiving 50,000 votes for governor to a body receiving at least 2% of the total vote cast for governor, or 130,000 votes, whichever is greater, in a gubernatorial election year, and at least 2% of the total votes cast for president, or 130,000 votes, whichever is greater, in a presidential year. Is there a second?
I second it.
Excuse me.
Any
Where are we in these?
We can clear the room if they're disrupting the commission.
They shame change.
People, you can clear the room. There's shame on you. This is what Trump does.
Can I have any?
For those limits, why are you changing them? There's no problem with the limits that there are. Why can't we for one person? It's not your charge. Look at what Trump.
There'll be a discussion about why a change is justified.
Yes, there will. If I can do it in simplest terms, the current 50,000 limit was set in 1936, I believe, or 35, excuse me, when there were a little over 4 million registered voters, and the turnout was less than half of what it is today in presidential elections. There's been no change over the last more than 3/4 of a century. The number of voters has gone up, the number of votes has gone up, and we've never made this adjustment. As a result, we end up with parties, and I'll name names like the Women's Equality Party, the Reform Party, the Tax Cut Now Party.
Sam?
Yeah, SAM, which I'm not even sure what that stood for. And we end up with a ballot that's totally cluttered, and there's no real basis for it except that people set up what I call vanity parties. We can't do that. In addition to which, each time you have one of these parties, unlike with independent bodies, there's an opportunity for primaries. And every primary, the candidates are eligible for campaign finance matching funds. And this could bankrupt the system with lots of these small parties, because all of us who've worked in this area know that the small parties generate primaries. And they often generate primaries for all the wrong reasons, which is largely the larger parties, the major parties, trying to grab these make-believe party lines. And, you know, the program just can't afford that. There hasn't been an adjustment. The numbers have gone up. This is a logical and reasonable extension of where we are and where we should be.
Other discussion from the members of the commission, please? No, excuse me. I'm going to ask that you not shout out. We've had hearings. We have listened to everybody. We stayed every single hearing to the very end till every person spoke. And we have taken written testimony, and we've taken testimony from experts, and now it is our opportunity to have reasoned discussion. You may disagree with us, and that is fair. But I ask that you please follow the protocol and allow us to do what we believe to be our job and in the best way that we could do it. And now I'd like to ask for additional, I'd like to ask.
Don't bear respect.
So I just want to also be respectful of, like, if we're going to take certain people out of the room when they scream out, that everybody's got to be treated equitably in that regard. So if people are going to scream out, regardless of who they are, then they have to be taken out. But it can't be selective in its implementation.
The purpose of this commission was to create a statewide public finance commission that works for all New Yorkers.
I'm going to ask you to leave, sir. I'm going to ask you to leave, sir. Okay.
But this is meant to be for all New Yorkers, for all of us.
And that is what I believe we are doing. Thank you. All right, let me move on if I could. Other discussion on this matter. I want to just make quick points, and I just will make quick points that the the points that Commissioner Berger made, I agree with. I think what people have to realize is that we are not looking to target any particular party. My assessment is that my assessment is that any credible party, and of which I know we can all agree on which are the credible parties, are going to make these thresholds and have demonstrated that in the past that they were able to make them, and will demonstrate it again in the future. And so what I would say to you is that we don't want is a general election that looks a lot like what happened in the race for public advocate in the city of New York, where $7.1 million of taxpayer money was spent to yield 119,000 votes, numbers of candidates, 8 different candidates spent $5 million, average of $112 a vote. We have to watch the public fisc, and that's why I think this is important. Is there any other conversation?
I like this democratic process, by the way. Strong-arming people out of the meeting because they disagree with you.
No, we're asking you to leave because you're not supposed to be speaking. Go ahead.
No, I would just say, you know, I'm a little uncomfortable in characterizing anything as credible or vanity parties. If they've been able to meet the thresholds, then they're a party. It shouldn't be anyone's determination whether or not that's credible. What we're saying here is we're increasing the threshold to be considered credible under our law because we're creating a new program. And at the current thresholds, there may be a fiscal impact that jeopardizes the program itself, or potentially our charge in being able to stay within the 100 million. That to me is what what's being said, if I can restate it, because it's really the credibility is a determination of how many supporters of that party are necessary for it to be considered a party. It's just a change in party definition. It's not a determination in retrospect.
Well stated. Anybody else?
Yes, I'd like to be heard on this issue. So first, the issue was put on the table of banning fusion voting. We got that issue off the table. Then this issue came up of party qualification. It's a different issue. It's a troubling issue, but it's still a different issue. The enabling legislation does say that the commission can deal with political party qualifications, can adapt, can recommend changes to the election law. Whether in the courts, and we'll let the courts deal with that issue. So then the question comes up is, how do we deal with this party qualification issue? I think a strong argument can be made that our party qualification, our definition of a party in the election law is outdated because it was done in 1935 or 1936 and things have changed. So then how do we come up with a reasonable definition of what constitutes a political party? Well, you've all seen in the newspapers that the number 3% was thrown out. And a number of us fought hard against that. But in order to get a campaign financing program in place, which is our primary objective, it's become obvious that we need to compromise on this issue. We need to do something on this issue, or the whole thing's gonna go down the drain. And we want, our primary focus is to get a campaign financing program that we think will work in place. This is a compromise. And sometimes we're never happy with compromises, but we have to try to get
Completely out of nowhere. Absolutely no basis.
We're not here to have an argument with the, let's go.
Kill every minor party except for the Conservative Party. You are doing the governor's bidding.
I,
You know what you're doing.
I understand what the argument is, but we need to get a campaign financing program in place, and that requires.
Go back to the legislature.
Okay. Are there any other comments?
I disagree. We need to get a program in place that's likely to work, and I don't think the legislator would act on this. They had the opportunity, they
Okay.
As someone who is, sorry, Commissioner Galvin.
I just need the motion. I just need motion again when we get to the vote.
I'll read the motion to you again, if I could, okay?
Yeah, he'll read it again. I'll have my comment, don't worry.
Okay.
Thank
The
you.
motion is move to amend Section 1-104(3) of the election law to change the definition of party as a body receiving 50,000 votes for governor to a body receiving at least 2% of the total votes cast for governor, or 130,000 votes, whichever is greater, in a gubernatorial election year, and at least 2% of the total votes cast for president, or 130,000 votes, whichever is greater, in a presidential year, election year. Okay? Commissioner Katachu?
Just a clarifying question, as this is definitely not an issue on which I'm an expert, but it seems like a high threshold to have it both in presidential election years and gubernatorial years. I just want to be enlightened myself personally about why that approach, and are there other states that do it that way?
Yes, there are quite a number of states that do threshold in every year. There are states that do them every 2 years and every 4 years. The search from across the country had various threshold levels, from as high as 20% to as low as 0.5%. The one thing I will point out, that none of these states that do it in multi-year, give a multi-year party qualification, have the benefit of fusion voting, which exists and will remain in New York, which means that in each of these other states, for a party to be qualified, they need to meet their threshold using a candidate that is not a major party candidate, where the custom has been, with some exception, here in New York, that parties, many of the parties have made their threshold by using a major party candidate. So that is the answer to what goes on around the state.
It's not true. Connecticut has fusion
And they qualify every year, and they qualify every year.
It's because he doesn't want the Working Families Party on the ballot.
Only 1% of people voted in many districts last time. How many people are you
District by
putting up
district.
again for voting?
Yeah, and just to be clear, in Connecticut, one must qualify district by district. It's a totally, every year, it's a totally different system.
That's just, okay, yeah.
New York and Alabama.
And this man is lying to you because he's not telling you that to put a candidate on the line of a major party in the presidential year, the major party has to give permission. So Jay Jacobs can keep the Working Family Party off the line. Why? I'm going. I don't want to sit here. You're doing it for your boss Cuomo because he's kind of pissed off at us. Well, you're lousy Trump. That's what Trump is doing. We want to impeach Trump for that. And you people are doing it.
You had no
Shame
problem,
on
Jay,
you.
with the
Shame on you.
equality
Shame on you, John Donut.
You had no problem
Shame
with
on you,
following
John Donut.
a third party on the
Shame on all
ballot.
of you.
A phony party run
It's
by
okay.
white men.
Trump in
No
New York.
problem, Shay.
Trump
You
in
can't
New York.
even carry that.
Shame on you. Shame on you. Shame on you. Shame on you.
For example, Hungary, Philippines, New York State. Absolutely useless. Set an example for America, democracy. What do I tell my students about you?
Commissioner Katachu?
So sorry, just clarifying, because
Yeah.
you gave me a bunch of states that have different provisions, but no state necessarily that has the provision that it's both and, right? So in a presidential year election and in the gubernatorial
Well,
election.
it
I'm
is
just clarifying, is that the
It is,
case?
there are statewide and presidential years in the states that all require two-year requirements. Governors tend to run 4 years. So that's all of those states, and there are quite a lot of those states. Yeah. Yeah. Any other-
I'm a little hesitant to say what I'm about to say for fear of, no, I can, but thanks for the advice. The last gubernatorial election, there was 6,300,000 votes. 6,300,000. You're asking that in order to be eligible for up to $7 million in public funds, that a party get 130,000 votes. When you look at it and put it in perspective and take all of the anger and emotion and everything out of it, I really don't believe that getting 130,000 out of 6 million is too onerous of a requirement.
I agree, and frankly, we all need to vote, and people need to vote. People need to vote for their elected officials, they need to vote for their legislature, and they need to vote for their governor. We should have a much higher voting rate in New York State, full stop.
Okay. Are there any other comments?
Just on the more technical side of it, with respect to the presidential, I just want to get on the record stating that there are some issues, given how the current election law is built, with respect to a party, how a party's constituted, the process in terms of gaining status, weighted vote, formation of the party in the second year, which now would butt up against the presidential. So I just want to put those issues on the record, so that I don't think they're appropriate that we address all of those, but just that if this motion does carry and this is part of the final package, that the legislature take a look at it and make sure that the components of how a party operates mesh with the changes that we're making here.
Thank you, Commissioner.
And any recommendations you provide for the severability of this provision?
Yes. Other comments? Okay, then I'm going to go to a roll call vote.
I'm not sure. Crystal, do you want to say a comment? We're not sure if you're waving at us or not.
Commissioner Rodriguez? Okay, thank you. Commissioner Berger?
Yes.
Commissioner Dennerstein?
Yes.
Commissioner Galvin?
Yes.
Commissioner Gatacho?
Can you come back to me, please? I'm still thinking. I'm being
Okay.
thoughtful.
Commissioner Jacobs is a yes. Commissioner Nona?
Yes.
Commissioner Previtt?
No.
Commissioner Rodriguez?
Can you come back to me as well?
Sure. Commissioner Vargas?
All right, we're going to have to open it up for discussion then.
Commissioner Gatacho?
Continue with discussion.
No, we don't have to. We're going to continue the vote.
Okay.
Commissioner Gatacho?
I'm really torn on this. I think I'm being honest on the merits that seems like a very high threshold to meet in every 2-year cycle, and that at least based on what I've read, it seems like if there is a state, it would be Iowa that has this provision in place, but maybe there is no other state. And because this is the first time we're discussing this, I'm having a hard time coming to a vote in this moment to say that this is the right threshold. That's why I asked for more time to consider my vote. So I'm not ready, is the honest answer.
Commissioner Rodriguez?
Yes.
Commissioner Vargas?
I think we should.
Would you two commissioners care to abstain?
I mean, the consideration for me is this coupled with all of the other components of the program that we've been, not even the program, of the campaign finance program that we've been talking about, and I'm trying to rationalize all of that in the totality of circumstances and not have this feel like an isolated vote, and it feels like a high threshold. So that is my personal concern.
And your vote?
My vote is no.
Okay, and Commissioner Vargas?
This is a very tough decision, and please no comments from the audience. It's not open for discussion anymore. It's just an open public setting. And what I would like to say is, I do agree with my colleague next to me. It is high, and I go no.
Okay. So the motion passes 6-3, and I'll go on to the next motion. This is a move to increase the signature requirement for independent nominating petitions, and I move to amend Section 6-142 of the election law to change the signature requirement for independent nominating petitions from 15,000 signatures, excuse me, to change the signature requirement for independent nominating petitions to 45,000 signatures, or 1% of the total number of votes, excluding blank and void, cast for the office of governor at the last gubernatorial election, whichever is greater, with at least 500 signatures, or 1% of enrolled voters, whichever is greater, from each of 1/2 of the congressional districts in the state. Is there a second?
I'll second. Discuss.
Okay. Let's open for discussion. That's 1%.
This is coming up kind of on the 11th hour without the ability to carefully consider it. I also have a question as to whether we have the authority under the enabling statute to do this and whether it could be challenged in court. So I'm having real problems agreeing that we should move forward on this at this point in time when we haven't really had a discussion and a debate on it in detail.
I have to correct the reading of that. I may have gotten the reading of that wrong, and I apologize.
So repeat it from the beginning.
Yeah, I will repeat it from the beginning, if I could. Yeah. Okay. It's moved to amend Section 6-142 of the election law to change the signature requirement for independent nominating petitions to 45,000 signatures, or 1% of the total number of votes, excluding blank and void, cast for the office of governor at the last gubernatorial election, whichever is less. Okay? So it's at most would be 45,000, with at least 500 signatures, or 1% of the enrolled voters, whichever is less, from each of the 1/2 of the congressional districts in the state. Again, my apologies on that. I'm sorry.
And these are the signatures for the independent?
That would be for independent nominating.
Comment? So, I mean, I haven't looked at the numbers in terms of whether or not what the impact of this change, this proposed change would be. Well, I just raise again an urging of some sort of consistency, whether or not these are consistent with other changes we're making in terms of how much of an increase it is. I don't know, but I want to raise that point. But also, I don't know if I heard a justification similar to the party thresholds as to the fiscal impact of not making this change or making this change, and I think that would be helpful if there is one.
I have two thoughts on this. One is substantive and one is purely legalese. On the substance, independent nominating petitions for every office except for the statewide offices are 3 times what the party nominations are. And that is because for an independent nominating petition, you can get signatures from any voter, whereas for a party designation, you can only get it from members of the party. That is different statewide under the current law. Under the current law, designating petitions statewide require 15,000 votes. Independent nominating petitions also require 15,000 votes. If you're a Republican with 3.5 million voters in your party, you've got to get 15,000 votes if you want to challenge in a statewide primary. But if you want to run on an independent nominating line, an independent designation, you can go to 12.5 million voters, and yet still required to get the same 15,000 votes. There's just no consistency there. The other is that this was also a number that was set more than 3/4 of a century ago. And the number of voters has increased, the number of people who you can reach out to sign the petitions has increased. This is actually, if we can say this about the election laws, this would actually be a logical change. My concern about it is that within our mandate in our enabling legislation, we were required to consider, according to the statute, 3 things: public campaign finance, multiple party designation, and party qualification. independent nominating petition ballot access was not included. You know, so as a matter of logic, I think the answer on this is yes. I think if we adopt it, I think there's a more than reasonable chance that the courts will say, as they did in the judicial pay raise suit, this is a piece you don't have authority to adopt, and will knock it down. If they do knock it down, I would hope the legislature would then adopt it. I mean, because it's a change that ought to be made in the law. So that's where I am on this. And as a result, I'll probably vote yes, because I'm hoping it will force the legislature to make the change.
May I just want to give you the financial rationale, if I could, because I think that Commissioner Berger has stated it really very well on the other. So you understand, since 1994, there have been 7 elections for governor. There have been anywhere from 5 to 10 individual candidates for governor running in each of those elections, representing groups as varied as the Right to Life Party, Tax Cut Now, Socialist Workers, Natural Law, Workers' World, Marijuana Reform, Unity, Libertarian, Constitution, Peace and Justice, The Rent's Too Damn High, Populist, Socialism and Liberation, Taxpayers, Anti-Prohibition, Freedom, Women's Equality, Stop the Common Core, which later became, after they qualified, their Reform Party, the Sapien Party, and Save the America Movement. The implication, just so we understand it, is that if you have, this is separate and distinct from party qualification. This is about the ability of groups, some of which, when the election came, got no more than 10, 12, 13,000 votes statewide in elections that were near 5 million votes total. But these candidates who run on these party lines will still have access to the millions of dollars in the statewide offices. And I just refer you to recollect some of these candidates and the number of these candidates and whether or not taxpayer dollars should be, going toward all of this. If you think about it, if you've got 7 candidates and they can each access $3.5 million just in the general election, forget the primaries, then you're looking at something in the $25 million range, right there just on one particular race. And this is not an unreasonable effort, given that you can get any voter in the entire state to sign your petition. That's what I'm saying. So that's why I favor it.
My only comment would be is, having been a person that's been out and about trying to get petitions at a certain point in my life, it's a long, arduous process to get the requirements met, particularly in this day and age when people throw things at you basically when you come to their door talking about politics. I would make a motion to reduce the 40. I understand everybody's arguments and proportionality and 3/4 of a century and all of that. But I would make a motion, or could we consider reducing that number to the tune of $25,000? Sorry.
Votes.
25,000 signatures. 25,000 signatures is an extraordinary amount, having seen them filed, the 15,000 signature petitions. And you have to build in an account for if there's a real challenge, the reduction caused by that challenge. And I think that when you make the signature requirements higher than many party members that currently exist, you run into a little bit of a problem. So that's my only point in the discussion.
I'd just like to point out that with respect to your comment about all the people running for governor, they still would have the potential effect on the public finance program, campaign finance program. They still have to raise $500,000 to get 5,000 contributions, so that's a big hurdle they have to overcome. Secondly, I don't know how many people on this dais have been in elected of office. I have, and I've had to go out and get independent nominating petitions. It isn't easy at all. Sometimes you could spend 8 hours and get 5 signatures, so this is a real hurdle, and that's another problem I have with it from my own practical experience.
Just if I could give you some comparison so that you know. for the congressional candidate, if you wanted to be an independent, have an independent petition for a congressional candidate, you need 3,500 signatures in any one of the 27 districts. Extrapolated out to 27 districts is statewide 94,500. If you wanted to become a state senate, and we're not changing these.
I mean, Commissioner Jacobs, I understand simple math. And that's a big thing for me to say, because anybody that knows me knows I really can't add. But I understand the simple math that you're using for the illustration. I'm just saying practically, the practical implication of that signature requirement could virtually be insurmountable in many cases. That's my only point. So, if we could consider reducing the number, I think people
come
might be.
north?
Pardon me?
Could you come north of where you are?
Oh, okay.
Like we're gonna do, like 30? Look, I just think 45 is too high, and, I mean, you of all people know how difficult it is to get signatures out in today's day and age. Well, maybe not, 'cause, but in any event, I understand it all, I do. I just think that's a big number, practically. And what is the time frame that you have to get those signatures? 3 weeks?
No, it's
No, for independent nominating petitions,
Oh, 6 weeks?
it's 6 weeks, yeah.
So 6
We give
weeks,
them more time.
6 weeks in the winter. Well, that
Yeah, I was gonna say, but in addition to the timing issues and the number of, the change in the political calendar is kind of changing the context of when you're gathering those signatures in much of the state, making it much more difficult than it used to be when it occurred later in the year. But I'll let.
It's 1,000 signatures a day.
But it's actually in the spring because they're, you know, they used to have to get it under the old, in the heat of the summer. Now they get to do it in the spring.
Go to the North Country in the spring, see if they call it spring.
It's not spring yet. They don't have spring.
They don't have
We have summer and winter.
Okay, Commissioner Galvin has made a motion to amend this to 30, do we say, or?
No, I said 25.
I thought I heard
but,
30.
What do you consider it?
That's her motion.
It's my motion. I mean, I think 25 is high, too. I think 30,000 is far more reasonable than 45,000. I do. I'll amend my motion to,
Let's call the question on the current motion
well, I
and then see if
kind
there's
of
any.
agree with them. Okay, I'm gonna make my motion for 25,000.
See, that's why the public can't speak.
Is there a second to that?
Kind of have to second it.
What did he say?
I have to.
Oh, he has to.
His ankle was at risk.
No, I understand all of the arguments on both sides of this.
We're going to do a roll call on this, if there's any other conversation?
Well, what are we voting on, 45 or
No,
25?
we're voting on
25.
On the amendment.
On the amendment, 25. All right. So let me go back to the alphabet. Commissioner Berger?
No.
Commissioner Dennisstein?
No.
Commissioner Galvin?
Yes?
Commissioner Gatacho?
No.
Commissioner Jacobs is a no. Commissioner Nona?
No.
Commissioner Previtt?
Kind of have to say yes.
Commissioner Rodriguez?
No.
And Commissioner Vargas?
No.
Okay, that amendment fails. Can I?
Now we have to go to the higher one.
Yep.
Do you have another motion?
No,
No, we have the pending motion.
Okay, the pending
But is there another
motion.
amendment or, no?
no.
No? Okay.
On the pending motion, is there any other conversation?
The pending motion is 45,000.
Yeah. Okay, then I'm going to go and bring it to a vote. Commissioner Berger?
Yes.
Commissioner Dennisstein?
Yes.
Commissioner Galvin?
No.
Commissioner Catacho?
No.
Commissioner Jacobs is a yes. Commissioner Nona?
No.
Commissioner Previtt?
I'm going to abstain. I really have no sense of this one in terms of where those numbers lie.
Commissioner Rodriguez?
No.
Commissioner Vargas?
No.
The motion fails.
Is it inappropriate to make a new motion at 30,000?
No, it's not inappropriate.
I move 30,000. Same
Second.
motion, but 30,000 instead of 45,000.
I'll second.
What, was that Kim's number too?
30,000.
Well, Kim's was 25.
Kim was 25 and she did not want to amend to 30, but Berger's amending to 30.
Okay, is there discussion at 30,000?
No, I'm just saying, no, I think it ought to be increased.
I agree.
And, you know, but, you know.
Call the vote.
You know, we ought to take, you know, see where we are on it.
Let's go. Commissioner Berger?
I made the motion, yes.
Commissioner Dennisstein?
Yes.
Commissioner Galvin?
Yes.
Commissioner Katachu?
No.
Commissioner Jacobs is a yes. Commissioner Nona?
No.
Commissioner Previtt?
I'll abstain again, just be consistent.
Okay, Commissioner Rodriguez?
No.
Commissioner Vargas?
No.
2, 3, 4, it's 4 to 4.
It fails.
It fails, motion fails.
How can it be 4 to 4? Oh,
Nope.
you abstained.
You abstained.
Well,
You
unless you
choose to
wanna
vote
change your
or?
vote.
Well, I'm slightly, I want to understand, are we saying that there's a fiscal component to this?
There's definite fiscal component in that then you would need, you would have less of a chance that parties that do not have not parties, organizations that do not have substantive support would have a larger hurdle to get onto the ballot so as to have fewer of them, like the rent is too damn high party and all of those folks.
They get on the ballot, they're not qualified, but they're qualified for the program?
They are qualified for the program. We can't.
So they would be qualifying for the program potentially with 15,000
That's right.
signatures.
That's the way it is now.
And,
Yeah, they have to have the contributions too.
right, they have to meet the contributions, but is this only for statewide?
This is only for statewide.
We're not doing the minor. Okay. I mean, I think acting consistently with other decisions we make, I think the motion makes sense, the motions that have been brought, but I don't have an opinion on numbers. I just wanted to understand what the.
Okay, so you're not going to vote?
The one I abstained on was at 30.
Well, that's where we are now.
From
We're back at 30.
15?
Yeah. You abstained at 25, and then you have the chance to vote now at 30. No, he abstained.
I'm gonna vote no on that.
Okay. Failed. Okay. Next, I would like to ask, before we vote on the entire package, I'd like to ask, well, I mentioned that in the beginning, the deadline and dates for delivery of the final recommended bill and report to members is that we're going to have everything in by December the 1st, and if members have their reports, if they could get that to us by the close of business tomorrow, by email. You can email either myself or the entire commission, and certainly Charles Pensabene, who's putting everything together, and then we'll take it from there. So
I'm gonna need more time for
okay,
Friday.
Friday's fine. Okay, and
Do we all get Friday, or is it or just, I was like,
You have to ask dispensation.
I would like special dispensation at least until Wednesday so that I can.
okay,
process.
Wednesday's fine, but we just need to start getting them in. And,
I want to be
Okay.
considered to have it late too then.
okay. What I would like is, given that this aspect is where we are, I would like to ask Commissioner Berger to go through the bill at the moment.
We have the recommendation in front of us. I think you all have copies. It was previously, a little while ago, distributed. Going to go through it section by section. There are a couple changes that have come up out of what we've done today and corrections. If anybody has any corrections they want to make, please make them now. If they're If minor technical things come up later, I think Commissioner Galvin will have a motion on that. But what we're approving now essentially is the recommendation that will be submitted. And so let's then.
I think if I do my motion, it might make it easier for people as we
Please
go
go.
through the,
Yep.
yeah. I would just move that in the event that after submission, but before the legislature's time to act has expired, that the commission finds non-substantive but required changes to its report and/or bill draft, that the commission shall notify the legislature of the same, and those edits shall be included in the proposal as part of the commissioner's final plan. In no way shall such proposed edits alter the substance of the agreements that are contained therein, but shall be technical in nature.
Yes, I'd like to call a question. All those, any other discussion? All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
All right. This won't be the quickest process, but, you know,
Can I ask this, before you begin this, can we do a bathroom break?
Yes.
Yes, please.
Okay, we're going to take a, before we go through the bill, we're going to take a 15-minute, okay, 15, 20 minutes. It's now,
Chris, you got
how's this?
15 minutes.
12:30, we'll reconvene at
We'll call you back.
12:30.
You want
Is
us
that
to call
fair?
you back, or you want to stay there?
Just